and we'll be doing the short analysis now. So the detailed text analysis will be out in another hour or so. But for now, I'll just be sharing the thoughts that I had. So before the test, what was going through my mind and what exactly happened during the test. And if it was any different from what we had expected or something else happened that usually doesn't happen at the CET, right? So that is basically what I'll be discussing in this one. So overall, if I were to grade the test, it would have been classified as being on the easier side. So those of you who would have taken SIM CETs, let's say, for example, you would have been able to figure out how to answer most of the questions that appeared at the test, right? So there were no surprises as to so to say in terms of the question types that were there. In terms of the split, again, in the morning slot itself, people gathered that the question paper was divided into 4 different sections, right? So there was a drop down at the top right wherein you could have in terms of navigating the interface and figuring out what it looked like, right? And there were 70 questions from analytical questions from quant and verbal, so that part remained the same. In terms of what happened in terms of individual sections, if we were to look at it in terms of say verbal ability and reading comprehension, there were, I believe, 3 passages that were there as a part of the section, and they had all 3-4 questions that were there as a part of each RC passage, from what I remember. Now, of course, we will come up with detailed analysis in some time, but this is top of my mind, whatever I experienced during the test, right? A couple of passages were relatively straightforward, and the questions that were there were direct in nature, which basically meant that you just had to read the passage and you had to just answer the question, and you would have been done with it, right? The options were far apart. They weren't even close in most situations, so RCs were manageable, except the one RC which I felt was slightly complicated, which was the Australian banks one, right? The top 4 Australian banks and how they do not really follow the cycle that is followed by the global economy and so on, right? So at least 1 or 2 questions I felt were slightly difficult in that passage, and the passage itself was slightly difficult to read and understand, probably because it was not in an Indian context or not really something which a lot of people would have known, right? So that was one thing that I felt was slightly difficult, except a couple of questions on vocabulary. I felt that overall it was fine. There were a few questions, some 3 or 4 questions I believe, that were on grammatically correct / incorrect parts in a particular sentence, so those were manageable. I saw some 3 questions on jumbled paragraphs, which are again very easy. So King Midas and his golden touch, a very straightforward passage to form from the sentences that were given to you. Correct spelling was of a particular word. Again, most of them were fairly straightforward. There was just one bit wherein I got a bit confused, but that was mostly because I have not been in touch. But otherwise, more or less the RCVA part in terms of entire section in around 35ish minutes, because the RCs were fairly straightforward, easy to read, short passages in most cases, except the one passage that I mentioned. Questions were straightforward, and in terms of vocabulary, grammatical errors, jumbled paragraphs, and the again, they were manageable questions. So I believe 35 to 40 minutes would have been an ideal amount of time to solve this particular section, right? In terms of how many vocabulary questions, again, I don't remember counting how many vocabulary questions were there, but I believe there were easily 10 questions is what I would assume, including the ones which required you to find the correct spelling of a particular word, right? So including that and the normal synonyms, antonyms, which one of the following belong to a particular group or not, I would suggest around, I would assume somewhere around 10 to 12 questions is what I would be aware of. Of course, if there are changes, we'll put it in the text analysis, so stay tuned for that bit, right? So that was about the vocabulary questions in the RC. In terms of LR, again, that was the first section that I attempted in today's slot, and honestly, the first question that I went through was incorrect, wherein someone you were supposed to figure out which symbolic relationship tells you that he is the maternal uncle of the. Thought that the question was incorrect, so maybe it was incorrect. Otherwise, logical reasoning, I could spot some 3 or 4 sets that were there. The ones that are the most memorable and the difficult ones are the ones which involved, that was one which was on the difficult side. So again, that was one bit that could have been skipped or could have been guessed, right? So those 2 sets I thought were slightly difficult. This third bit that I thought was difficult in the LR section specifically was the question on sequential output. I was able to figure out the logic, but I was not able to figure out the arrangement for some reason. Maybe I was mistaken, but I thought that was slightly on the ambiguous side. Otherwise, logical reasoning was fairly straightforward. There were a lot of questions on reason, as in a statement and the reason behind that particular statement. I think they expected you to know the scientific principle, but they were fairly straightforward, so you could have taken some guesses or a leap of faith, and you could have answered those questions well, right? So that was one thing. In terms of sequences and odd one out, I think very fairly straightforward questions that were there. I remember some questions on Venn diagrams. One set was there which was again manageable if you knew the basics of Venn diagrams. There was another set on people playing a lot of sports. Again, that was something that was manageable. So there were a lot of manageable questions overall. I think out of 75 questions from logical reasoning, maybe 55-ish questions could have been attempted irrespective of your level of preparation, right? So that's what I thought. And the entire section should not have taken more than 60 or 65 minutes if you knew which questions to let go of and when, right? So that was very important. In terms of the quant section, there were a lot of questions on time, speed, distance, specifically trains crossing each other and crossing poles and platforms and whatnot. In fact, it became annoying after a point in time because there were so many questions on trains and poles, right? And relative speed, of course, was the prominent feature. I saw some questions on number theory, which some CAT aspirants might be aware of, but again, they were fairly straightforward. Something along the lines of 4 raised to something divided by 6, what will be the remainder? So those kind of questions, manageable questions, but yeah, some people might have been taken unawares. One question on trigonometry is what I saw, angle of elevation and angle of depression, those kind of questions. So one question was there. Otherwise, it was a straightforward section, mostly arithmetic based questions, hardly anything on geometry. One question on geometry that I remember, but the answer was expected in the form of percentage change in area. Very, very straightforward question. So all those questions were manageable in terms of quant. I would only be slightly worried about the question types wherein you have to figure out as to how many statements or what combination of statements are required to answer a particular question. So that was one thing that I thought was slightly difficult. Otherwise, quant was manageable. You could have attempted somewhere around 35-ish questions for sure. And you should not have taken more than again 35-40 minutes, 45 if quant is specifically your weak section. And the last one, visual reasoning. Visual reasoning was, I thought, easier than usual because in a lot of scenarios the diagrams used to be hand drawn, but today I did not really I don't really recollect any of the diagrams that were hand drawn, right? So most of them were drawn using again some technology, I would say, and that's why they made it easier. The question seemed easier, right? Maybe except 2 or 3 questions, I thought that the section was manageable. One question was there on the faces of a die. There were a couple of questions on which 3 elements can together form a square. There were a few questions on 9 figures were given to you, and you had to figure out which 3 what combination of 3 figures will be there. So 3 3 3. So 1 4 7 could be similar figures. 2 3 5 could be similar, and so on, right? So those kind of questions were there. Again, manageable questions though. So overall, if you look at it, it was easier is what I thought than the mocks that I had taken. So I had taken a couple of mocks this season, one with the help of rough work and the other without any rough work. So I thought it was easier than the mocks that I had taken. I think somewhere around 170-ish genuine attempts, 170, 175 if someone is a bit more aggressive. That should be a very good attempt in this particular test. 145-ish, 145 to 150 raw score should be decent enough for JBIMS, or on the borderline rather for JBIMS. 150 and above, I think you should have a very good chance of cracking JBIMS. So that's more or less the analysis from my side. What we will do is we will also be coming up with a detailed text analysis soon. So make sure that you stay tuned for that bit, and we will share it across groups and on the community tab as well. So make sure that you are tuned in for that particular bit. Yeah. Thank you everyone, and bye.